He who does not think about the future has no present.
I believe that we are now living in a world that is undergoing a transformation. Is it better to do everything on your own, or is it still necessary to collaborate?
There isn't a single country in the world that's leader in everything.
Digital sovereignty means that once you've built that digital system, your life cannot be compromised through it.
In the wake of this technology, humanity and individuals must also take a step forward.
Effective cooperation between government agencies and the business community in the commercial sector can go a long way toward achieving that very sovereignty. We are a country, and we need to work together. Let's start with globalization, or international cooperation. We'll talk about sovereignty and technological independence. And Yuri, if you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to join in on the first round of the conversation. The Open Dialogue is an international project that brings together experts, analysts, and people from around the world to understand where humanity is heading. The second cycle of the project's report is dedicated to key megatrends that are already changing the world. The authors note the breakdown of the previous model of globalization, the transformation of the financial system, and rapid technological development. Demographic changes and new technologies are transforming labor markets, social institutions, and the very notion of sovereignty. In the new reality, human capital, the ability of a person to learn, adapt, and realize their potential, becomes the most important resource. But any forecast is not the final answer. This is an invitation to the open dialogue. I remember very well, back when I was in college, taking an international economics course. There was a classic example. If one country is better at growing apples and another is better at growing pears, then that's how it should be. The first country grows apples and the other grows pears. That's clear. But here's the interesting conclusion. If one country produces both apples and pears more efficiently, then even in that case, it's still in their best interest to specialize. This is what's known as the theory of comparative advantage. Well, maybe this works with apples and pears, but does it work in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and other technologies? Here's the question. Which is more important? Technological sovereignty, isolationism, and trying to do everything on our own, or is it necessary to cooperate after all? You've studied the report, Yuri, so let's start with you, and then Maxim Stanislavovich.
Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Mikhail asked me to critique the report. Overall, I like the report.
Do you want to know why? Because in reality, it's not really normal for us to just stop and think about the future, about the big picture, or about how the world works. This report no longer answers questions. Instead, it poses them so that we can reflect together on what we should do. Because understanding the broader context is the key to a great victory in the future. What really caught my eye was that technologization and digitalization were one of the key areas there. Although, from my perspective, if we look at the entire report, digitalization is the main reason for writing it in the first place. I mean, it's the influence on our world that's driving these changes. Both the loss of individual agency and changes in the economy are, in one way or another, the result of digitalization. And very little attention is paid to, and it is part of my job to notice these things, well, to cybersecurity. Because when we talk about sovereignty, we're often talking about the fact that it's possible to build a digital system. And digital sovereignty is the ability to build your own digital space. And that includes building it even when someone forbids you to do so. But digital sovereignty also means that once you've built that digital system, your life cannot be compromised through it. And so, on the one hand, we have the security provided by digitalization, and on the other, the readiness to live in conditions of total collapse. For example, this spring we had some, let's say, disasters. They cut off communications and, well, a lot of other things, all at once. So I walked to Luzhniki to work out a bit. I got there, as usual, with my keys and my phone, but I couldn't get back from there. I couldn't get through to my driver, I couldn't call a taxi, and when I tried to take the metro, they couldn't sell me a ticket. I said, well, here's my QR code. No, they couldn't sell a ticket. That was it. My life came to a standstill right then and there. And that, in fact, is also part of this broader concept of digital sovereignty. That is why our goal is to build digital sovereignty. But this is where we very often deceive ourselves. We believe that digital sovereignty emerges when we create our own digital system entirely on our own. I don't think even we could do that. That's the first point. Second, in today's world, it's not just people who are losing their agency. Countries are too. And if you look at how many countries are left that are free to do as they see fit, you can count them on the fingers of one hand. And so, if we want to live in a better world, our task is, after all, to ensure not only that we have sovereignty, but that other countries do as well. And not every country can build their own digital system. That is why it is crucial to approach global digitalization in such a way that every country feels it has digital sovereignty, even if it is not capable of achieving it on its own. And this, of course, leads us to the fact that we need to work together, because it is the measure of how sovereign you are in terms of your ability to build, your ability to maintain, and your ability to avoid disaster all depend on this. It's a tool that allows you to build international partnerships, and I think that this is precisely the kind of topic that, to some extent, it might make sense to include and explore in the report. Because you see, if we start modeling our digital system on the internationally accepted standard, will actually make it less attractive to other countries than the US system. Our resources in this regard are incomparable. It'll cost us more than it's costing China. I mean, we need to build a system that ensures sovereignty. And it's hard. This is, to some extent, a rethinking of our world order, because a digital system like that will first give sovereignty and autonomy at the country level, and then it will set its sights on the sovereignty and agency of the individual. In a world where we talk about how bad it is that people are losing their critical thinking skills, are gullible, and are susceptible to manipulation, the fact is that everyone wants to manipulate them. And in many ways, that's the kind of digital system that is being built.
And whoever is creating a digital system that first and foremost grants individuals their agency and the ability to be sovereign is eventually doing the same for countries. That's the kind of digital system we need to come up with. And if we do go ahead with it, it will certainly open up enormous opportunities for cooperation among different countries around the world, leading to the creation of a different UN, a cyber OOH, where we will agree on the principles and rules for building such a digital system. It seems to me that this part might seem a bit more abstract, perhaps a little more naive to some extent, and maybe not so easily grasped, but it should serve as a kind of hope for our civilization, that we will build a world in which we want to live. Once again, I believe that we are currently living in a world that is undergoing a transformation. It seems to me that nobody is satisfied with it anymore. That is my opinion, in a nutshell.
Indeed, although we've been working with experts throughout this year as a part of Open Dialogue, have really only touched on the concept of digital sovereignty. This is in fact only the beginning of this journey, because what does the report say? The report says that the digital sovereignty is becoming a key element of sovereignty in the modern world. It touches briefly of data, specifically who owns it, and briefly on algorithms, but there is a whole range of issues that need to be addressed and worked on in great detail. So what exactly is digital sovereignty? I completely agree with this comment. This is an area that we need to explore in depth, because without digital sovereignty, the future of the world and future of our country simply do not exist. In other words, deciding what to do and how to do it, instead of trying to do everything on our own. Of course, yes, you have to be able to do everything, yes, because in order to understand the world you're living in, you need to be able to do all of this yourself. If you can do certain things with your own hands, from simple databases to complex generative AI algorithms, and you simply don't understand where you are, but it's clear that no one can do everything better than everyone else. There isn't a single country in the world that can do that. So this is the second thesis, that the sovereignty of one country is achieved through the sovereignty of many, which is in fact also a very interesting idea that warrants further exploration. But when it comes to geopolitics, we're talking about the emergence of new centers of global sovereignty, and this is probably something that can be viewed through the lens of digital sovereignty.
And right away, one question came up in many of the essays. How much does sovereignty cost? I mean, when we start developing everything on our own, somewhere along the line, we probably...
We just need to answer one question right away. How much does sovereignty cost and how much will it cost to maintain it? So in a way, there are two things that always apply here. Nothing comes for free, and we have to make sure everything turns out well. As they say, no pain, no gain.
I think the most important thing is not to try to essentially buy this sovereignty outright, the way it's being bought in other parts of the world. For example, you can build your own neural network using your own dataset and training process so that it performs on par with the best in the world. That costs a lot of money, a huge amount of money. Should every country do this? Maybe not. Maybe some kind of open model should emerge, and not just the model itself, but the dataset as well, one that can be fine-tuned and verified. For example, right now, the Japanese are taking a very interesting approach. Generally speaking, if you can't build your own network, you can certainly build your own micro-network that helps you work with larger networks. It's a sort of an arbiter, which, in the end, you can use as a servant of the kind of sovereignty you need. And we have to admit that there are many areas in which we aren't leaders, and when we choose our own path, we often look to the leaders and try to follow their example. But we aren't leaders ourselves. Not being a leader is a different path. It's a path that might be cheaper in some ways, stronger in others, but it's different. And most importantly, even if this might seem offensive at first, you start doing things that the Americans don't do, that the Chinese don't do, because they're the leaders and we, in some areas, aren't leaders. Do we have to admit that we're not the leaders?
In some areas, we're definitely the leaders, that's for sure. For example, when it comes to artificial intelligence on digital platforms, from an economic standpoint, I believe we are one of the countries that are implementing these technologies to the maximum, and as quickly as possible in the financial sector, healthcare and urban services across the whole range for other areas, and we're achieving truly excellent results, and our solutions are in demand all over the world. But there's something I completely agree with. In reality, that's a leader in everything. Because, say, we're ahead in some areas, while in large language models the Americans are currently in first place, the Chinese are second, and so on. So here's an absolutely correct question. How do you find the right balance? A balance between where you should lead, where you can lead, and how much it will cost you. Yes, you can take the lead in any area by focusing your resources, but the question is that the best approach for you? Does it produce the best results? Yes, we know of many examples around the world where even small countries have focused on a specific area and achieved significant results, but at the expense of everything else. Is this search for that balance now, on the one hand, to ensure sovereignty, yes? This is, as a mathematician said, a solution to a minimax problem, that is maximizing sovereignty while minimizing costs. This is a problem we need to solve.
By the way, another very good question is, in fact, the financial aspect. How much does a particular element of sovereignty cost? And then there's another, essentially non-financial aspect, namely a certain spirit of cooperation. In other words, effective cooperation between government agencies, the business sector, and even just between businesses within the commercial environment can go a long way toward achieving that very sovereignty.
For example, to create good AI for cybersecurity, you need to build not just a small neural network, but assemble a good dataset. And what is a cybersecurity dataset? It's made up of specific incidents, specific breaches, specific problems. So, roughly speaking, we need to build a single national dataset that will train small neural networks out of doing the very things that are making headlines around the world right now. And it's not about the money. This is about the extent to which Kaspersky, Positive Technologies, and Sberbank could, hypothetically, sit down together and combine certain data. To what extent can we, within the state, say, there were these incidents, they're very dangerous and worrying. Shall we stamp them top secret? No, let's not do that. Let's share them with a limited number of companies, learn from them, but do so in a way that doesn't compromise national security. And here, in fact, there are some really good shortcut methods that let you achieve excellent results without any additional investment.
That is also a completely valid point. Achieving results with a minimum of resources is only possible if there is close cooperation between governments and companies. In other words, this means focusing our efforts when solving this problem, because unfortunately we do not have enough resources to address it comprehensively. No country in the world has not enough resources to achieve all of its goals in the same time.
You know, in our business world, we have this habit. We're always blaming the government for everything. The government isn't agile enough, isn't cooperative enough, and that's it. But if you look at the purely commercial sector, cooperation there isn't any better. I mean, there's money here, something else there, and that's it. Why bother with the strategic goals of the government or the country? I've got money here, so I'm doing this. In other words, we really shouldn't be blaming each other. We just need to take a moment to reflect on the fact that there are strategic goals. There is a country, and we need to work together.
Not all cooperations are equal. Yes, you can cooperate like this and achieve results through a partnership in which you protect your own interests. That is, in which you need your partner, and your partner needs you, and you move forward together. Therefore, there are also different types of cooperation. There is no binary answer here. It's not just on your own or together, is it? There's always, actually, there are many more shades to this process.
Cooperation is always beneficial when there is an overarching goal that is shared by all parties.
Well, there's a higher purpose. There is interdependence, and there are, let's say, many other factors that make this picture much more multifaceted. You can only put yourself in a situation where you could be deceived or misled simply because you're unaware of the problem.
Getting back to the question, it seems to me that, of course, we do have certain core areas right now on which we all feel we depend very heavily. These are AI, cybersecurity, and robots and robotics. These three areas are precisely the ones that could surprise us a lot, either in a bad way or a good way. But in reality, we underestimate the number of areas where we can implement this digitalization and raise the standard of living to a different level, a fundamentally different level. You know, we talk a lot about the platform economy, where technology is beginning, to some extent, to compensate for the kind of immaturity that's emerging in our society, the inability, in some cases, to solve really complex problems. We are using data to begin adapting and addressing what are essentially challenges for the government and industry. So there we are. We've launched a taxi service, we've launched marketplaces, and we've launched Gosuslugi, which is the largest government services platform. In other words, we've accomplished a lot. And just think of all the things we've done. That's the first question. And the second question is that, in fact, we often, very often, allow ourselves to follow what has already been done in the world. We weren't the first to launch a marketplace. We weren't the first to launch a taxi service. Well, we were perhaps among the first to launch a government services platform. How many areas like that are there? There's cybersecurity. There are cities of the future. And it seems to me that, in fact, our task here isn't to wait and see when this will appear on the world stage, but to figure out how we can make it happen here. And that's where the main question arises. Can we take on the challenge of solving problems on a national scale or not? And to what extent is the business environment supported here right now? Do we still have the same caliber of entrepreneurs? And what needs to be done to get them to come and work on this? There are actually more questions than answers there.
In this regard, I'm convinced that the country will move faster and faster toward achieving the necessary results and goals if the integration of new technologies into everyday life and practical reality proceeds at a faster pace. And it's really great that our country has financial technologies and urban services. I believe that the healthcare system Moscow is currently building is the best system and the best digital platform in the world for health management. Yes, there's still a lot to be done there and a great deal that needs to be achieved in the future, but in reality, what we already have is truly a model of how results can be achieved, sometimes using our own technologies, sometimes drawing on others, but our knowledge, our understanding, and the depth of that understanding are among the best to be found anywhere.